Hey, thank you all for being here. We'll get started in just a second. I know you could be doing other great things with your Wednesday night, like watching a bunch of people that hate America on the Democratic side of things engaged in a debate to see who could give away the most free stuff in their primary. So thank you very much for joining me. I didn't check out any of the debate. Perhaps I'll watch it later if I hear there was anything relevant, but I really don't care. I think the coup going on to overthrow a duly elected president is the biggest story in the country right now. And so I wanted to discuss particularly the testimony of Sondland today. I did not hear the testimony after that. So I just ask you, if anyone who's listening live has any audio issues or any issues of anything like that, please let me know. But everything should be working well tonight as I'm back home. Check, 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 check. For some reason, I'm losing all my viewers. Interesting. So, yeah, if there's any audio issues, just let me know. So, let's talk about the elephant in the room today, and that's Sondland's testimony. Now, I didn't get to listen to it live, but I have listened to basically the entire testimony in retrospect, and there's a lot to talk about it. First off, I could see how Democrats would initially think this is a huge win for them. You have to understand the idea with these Democrats, and I don't mean the Democrats that I know at my local level or my friends that are Democrats. I'm talking about those in the establishment that are controlling the party, that are working with the deep state, that are working with the military-industrial complex, academia, the mainstream media, etc. Those people, the people in power, they're obviously controlling the narrative and trying to push something out. One of the main reasons for this is they know that Trump is investigating their corruption, and they're doing everything they can to distract from that and to try to, when that evidence of that corruption comes out, to try to downplay it. Hey, what's up, Chrissy? Thanks for joining. So I can understand to those people how they would spin this as a win, because they finally got someone to say, yes, there was a definitive quid pro quo. And to them, that's going to be an enormous victory. Now, I got to hear the beginnings of that testimony and then had to do a bunch of work-related stuff. And so I had to come back later. But in my head, I'm thinking, okay, when I'm hearing Sondland's initial testimony, I'm thinking, great, you're saying it's a quid pro quo. Get to the point where you hear from Trump or even from Rudy Giuliani where they say this is a quid pro quo. And the Republicans should hammer down on that aspect. And of course, that's exactly what ends up happening. And it turns out that, in effect, there was no quid pro quo. There is no proof of a quid pro quo whatsoever. It's just Sondland's, quote, presumption that that's what was occurring. Now, they break this down into two parts, and Schiff is wise to try to do what he's doing. Schiff's playing a game where he's trying to act like if we could prove there's a quid pro quo, when is... Yeah, that's a good question, Modus. Is that a real word? Will any of the traitors get arrested? Who knows? We'll talk about that. I don't, sometimes I'm pessimistic about it, but we'll see. Hopefully the Durham investigation, it might take the investigation of actual Ukrainians to do something. We'll talk about their potential investigation as well. But what ends up happening is Schiff's trying to spin this narrative because he understands, Sondland admits, Sondland doesn't know jack about the aid. He doesn't know anything about why aid was held. He admits it. He says, I just presumed it must be because these things didn't occur, because these investigations didn't occur. But he admits it's a presumption. He even admits later in testimony, yes, different people could have heard the facts I heard and came to the different conclusions. So in other words, his testimony on the question of was aid withheld until there were investigations, or was there a quid pro quo on the aid, his testimony is no better than anyone else's. In fact, it's actually worse for the Democrats as I'll get. But he does claim that he interpreted that there was a quid pro quo, a clear quid pro quo, when it came to setting up a meeting between Trump and Zelensky. Now, Schiff is very shrewd in his questioning because he keeps saying that also is an official government action, correct? Setting up a meeting in the White House. Yes, Sondland says. Because the argument's now going to be spun, well, just because we can't find a clear quid pro quo with aid, we think that we found a quid pro quo with a Trump-Zelensky meeting, and therefore that alone is reason to impeach. And then they'll say, oh, and by the way, if that was a quid pro quo, then clearly the aid was a quid pro quo. But that's nonsense. Yes, it may be an official government action to host another country and their leadership and have discussions with them, but we have conditions set on discussions all the time. And there's no surprise, like, for example, Obama might not want to meet with Duterte, the leader of the Philippines that has talked trash on him, right? He made all kinds of homosexual jokes about Obama. As someone who wasn't an Obama fan, I would not begrudge Obama at all, being like, no, I'm not going to sit in a room with that guy now. Is that him unless he apologizes, right? Would that be Obama conditioning an official government action unless he gets a favor? I mean, that's nonsense. Now their case has fallen so low that it's, well, Trump wouldn't meet, unless these investigations were announced. Is that shady? And what's his proof of it? So we'll get into the details of that, the minutiae of it, because his proof's going to be very problematic, because basically his proof is, well, I didn't hear anything from Trump, and Giuliani didn't use those words, but everyone knew that that's what was going on behind the scenes. Because Giuliani talked about wanting these investigations, and he talked about wanting them announced. But that isn't proof that this was directly from Trump. And just because they wanted them, that's not proof that they were saying the aid won't occur unless these investigations are announced. That was just Sondland's feeling on it. And the fact that Sondland says everyone from Mulvaney to Volker to Morrison, who were the two witnesses that testified last evening, all of these people were in the loop about that. Then Sondland's claiming that Volker and Morrison and all of these people that testified are lying. Now, if they're lying about this, then why should we trust their testimony on anything? Are the Democrats really going to try to then say, well, we need to impeach we need to bring up people on perjury charges, Volker and Morrison, they need to be brought up on perjury charges because Sondland's clearly saying what they knew. Again, what this is Sondland, just like we see over and over in these cases, and I've been saying this from the get-go. All of this are people arbitrarily interpreting the innermost thoughts of other people. Remember, I've told you from the get-go, quid pro quos are not illegal. It is clear that the Democrats think that way because they have no problem with Biden's admitted quid pro quo. Their case needs to be a quid pro quo is corrupt or illegal if you're doing it for illegitimate reasons, for personal reasons. But in order to speak to that, you need to be able to argue as to the intent of the person issuing the quid pro quo. Not one witness has spoke to Trump's intent or his motivation or what he was thinking. Not one. And when pressed on it, all of the witnesses will say, well, I'm not going to speak as to what Trump believed or what Trump was thinking. They say that all the time in some hand, but in the other hand, they say, clearly Trump was doing this to benefit his 2020 election. But not one witness has testified Trump ever mentioned 2020 or mentioned benefiting him in any sort of election. Not once. They just assume. They assume Biden's motivations were pure. They assume Trump's were impure. Now we have Sondland saying, I also know what every other person who was involved in the ambassador's office or in the State Department's office, I know what all of them were thinking as well. He admits in his testimony he thinks Volker's a stand-up guy. He has no reason to dispute Volker's testimony. Yet here he is calling Volker a liar. So the Democrats can't have it both ways. They can't say, oh, well, Volker said this. Because they keep saying, for example, they said about Morrison, they said, Morrison claims that he talked to Sondland and Sondland said, I talked to Trump and he said no quid pro quo, but then he went on to basically explain that the aid would be conditioned. That's what Morrison said he heard Sondland say. Sondland was emphatic. I never heard Trump say anything like that. Trump specifically said no quid pro quo, which I'll get to in a minute. Now, if they want to say, well, Morrison's telling the truth here, but he's lying here, and Sondland's telling the truth here, but he's lying here. You don't get to pick and choose. What this shows was there was mass confusion. Now, you might say us, and then there's a chance that Trump did this, that it was a quid pro quo. Perhaps. But the case should be there is definitive evidence that Trump did something that was corruptible. They're trying to argue a quid pro quo is corruptible. But they don't have definitive evidence. They have people that they argue were misremembering here, but they're telling the truth here, and this witness says they're telling the truth, but this witness remembers it differently, and this witness says everyone that was involved and knew that it was a quid pro quo, even though all the other witnesses say, no, we didn't think it was a quid pro quo, we never saw evidence of that. So how are we to pick and choose? And of course, that's what the Democrats will do. Now again, the biggest, most significant piece of evidence, And this was outed by Schiff himself at one point after the second round of his counselor asking questions. They keep trying to press Sondland on the idea of, oh, so Trump issued this quid pro quo. And Sondland repeatedly says over and over, my conversations with Trump, he never mentioned the quid pro quo, ever, not once. Never mentioned Biden's name, nothing. At one point in August, Sondland says, and I'm going to swear, which I don't all the time, but I'm going to swear because I'm going to interpret what Sondland says, because Sondland admitted when being questioned, I even threw a 4-letter word in here that I wasn't talking about. So plug your ears if you're young and you don't want to hear this, right? Sondland says he was fed up. He's like, I have no idea why the aid's being withheld. So I called Trump and I said, what the fuck do you want from the Ukraine? And what did he say Trump said back to him? I want nothing. No quid pro quo. I want Zelensky to do what he promised to get him elected. Now, we've heard from every single witness say what? Zelensky's great. He's not corrupt. Finally, there's someone different. Finally, there's someone who was elected to fight the corruption. That's what Trump wants. Someone who will fight the corruption, right? That's what he's arguing. These are the only direct words we have from Trump about this from Sondland. One sec. Hey, what's up, man? I'm doing a live stream. Good. Oh, just about impeachment. Can I call you back tomorrow or way late tonight? All right, man. I'll talk to you soon. I thought maybe he wanted... That's a friend of mine who probably wants Trump impeached. I thought maybe he was going to say, sure, I'll come on and talk to you, but no. But that's it. Everything else Sondland's saying, he's saying, I presumed as much. I presumed as much. But that's the direct words from Trump. Now, this was originally spun. He says that that Morrison either... They're trying to get him to say, but Morrison said, you said that Trump said that even though he said no quid pro quo, he went on to describe basically the actions of a quid pro quo. And they say Morrison kept better notes than you, so that must be true. But Sondland is emphatic. Despite the fact I might not remember all the details of every conversation and things like that, Donald Trump never told me to issue anything like a quid pro quo. In fact, he said quite the opposite. Now, what are we talking about then? All of the news stories that were running, because what had happened, and you see this, Schiff, again, uses his time very shrewdly. It's a lot of gamesmanship. They do this a lot. They get to filibuster for basically the first 2 hours because they give an opening statement, then Nunez gets to talk for 5 or 10 minutes, and then the witness gives a statement, this happens every time. It's about 45 minutes or so. Then you get 45 minutes of Democratic statements, and then if they like it, they say, we're going to take a short break. Because they know that most people are only going to tune in for an hour or so. Then they go in the break, which gives their media allies time to say, this is devastating. It gave Schiff the time to go out in front of the cameras and say, that's it. He said quid pro quo. That's what this attempt is. And so then when the Republicans finally get to talk, it's like, but wait a minute. Didn't you say Trump never told you that? Yes, that's what I said. Didn't you say, in fact, you had no idea why the aid was being withheld? Yes, I said that. So you just presumed it was because these investigations didn't start? Yes. But you have no proof of it. Now, and Volker and other people that were involved, they didn't come to the same conclusion. Yes, that's true. So therefore, reasonable people could disagree. Yes. So how is this evidence of a quid pro quo? It's just his feeling. No one ever told him. In fact, I forget who it was. One of the Republicans said, did any human being ever tell you that there was any condition on an investigation in order to release aid? Any human? He said no. I think it was Turner that asked him that question. That's it. That's the end of the argument. You can't talk about how this proves some quid pro quo without, it's just his feelings, just like every witness before this. Just like Hill's testimony will be, tomorrow, I think? That'll just be her feels. Just like Vindman's testimony was just his feels. Just like Williams' testimony was her feels. Every single one of them, it's just like, well, I felt. A bunch of career diplomats that are Russia war hawks were upset that Trump dared to go against the establishment. He didn't think we should just willy-nilly send $500 million to other countries. He wants to protect our country, our border. But these diplomats don't like that. They set the policy. Watch Vindman's testimony. That's how they feel. How dare Trump come in and disrupt their foreign policy? The Democrats asked the question over and over. Was Trump asking for an investigation? Did that go along with established foreign policy? Newsflash, Trump is the established foreign policy. You might disagree. You might think that it's a bad decision for Trump to want to withhold aid. But that doesn't make it a crime. You know what you do with presidents that make decisions you don't like? You run or vote against them. You don't impeach them. Yeah, so let's talk about Vindman for a second. I did promise someone I would get to this. So here's the deal with Vindman. If you watched my video last night, which I apologize, there were some connection issues. Here's the story with Vindman. The biggest thing that came out of Vindman's testimony was this. The entire case for impeachment has been all based on hearsay. You even had Representative Quigley, a Democrat, laughably make the comment in the first day of testimony, actually, in many cases, hearsay is better than direct evidence. When you find yourself making such an idiotic statement like that, you might just want to shut up because your case sucks. Right? But we could all agree, the whole case is, I heard, like, listen to what Taylor's bombshell testimony was. I'm paraphrasing. Right? Here was Taylor's bombshell testimony. It was, one of my staffers overheard one of the assistants of Sondland saying that he overheard Sondland talking on the phone to Trump, who said there was a quid pro quo. So that's like 5 degrees of phone tag. And that was bombshell testimony day one. Right? So everything's been about hearsay. And Schiff's allowed and encourage him to say, now who did you hear that from? And they heard it from who? And what was this person's name? And what position were they in? That's what Schiff's been doing the whole time, right? Okay. Now Schiff and Vindman both claim they don't know who the whistleblower is. Both of them have made that claim. Okay? All right. Now, we know that Schiff has allowed people to say, I talked to this person, in fact, he's encouraged it. So Vindman starts talking, right? And Vindman says, they say, who did you talk to? Here's Vindman's story. He went outside of the chain of command. So he went to a lawyer, like the lawyer, not his personal lawyer, but a lawyer in the intelligence community. He goes to the lawyer. I can't remember his name right now. But he goes to a lawyer and he says, hey, I have concerns about this. He heard the call, right? I have concerns about this. The lawyer says, okay, let me talk to some people about this. This is Vindman's claim, right, by the way. So then Vindman talks to his brother, and he talks to George Kent, who was the witness of day one. And he says, and then I talked to a guy at the intel agency, at an intel agency about, and Adam Schiff goes, wait, you can't talk about that. You can't name that person. Now, wait a minute. Schiff has no idea who the whistleblower is, right? Neither does Vindman. So how didn't Schiff know that George Kent was the whistleblower? Or that Vindman's brother was the whistleblower? It could be anyone, right? So why did he allow, up to this point, Vindman to name a bunch of other people? He allowed Taylor, he allowed Kent, he allowed Williams. Everyone that had testified to that point, he allowed to talk about every other single person they talked to about this case. He encouraged it. But all of a sudden, when this one name comes up, is about to be released, he's like, oh, no, you can't talk about that. That'd be outing the whistleblower. The only way that Schiff makes that comment is if Schiff's lying and he knows who the whistleblower is. And the only reason that Vindman doesn't speak up and say, oh, no, it's not it's just some guy. What's the big deal? I don't even know who the whistleblower is. The only reason Vindman all of a sudden is like, oh, is because he also knows that's the whistleblower. And so as Real World's saying here, this is exactly what happened. Vindman hears the phone call. Now, Vindman and a bunch of these people in the State Department, including Ciaramella, who's the whistleblower, they're still basically agents of the establishment in Obama, particularly working with people like John Brennan, the former head of the CIA that's out to get Trump. John Brennan was involved in the coup against Trump from the get-go. One of the main reasons that John Brennan is out there plugging every day on mainstream media that Trump's a traitor, Trump needs to go to prison, Trump needs to be impeached, is because he knows that the Durham report and the IG report coming down is going to be devastating for him and for the other people in the intel agencies. What did Hillary supposedly say election night? If he wins, we're all gonna hang. Now, I don't know if that's true, but that's what's allegedly said. But the idea of it's true. These establishment people that rigged the game, they rigged the game against Bernie in the primary, they rigged the game against Trump in the general election. They've been incredibly corrupt. The Clinton Foundation was making these people incredibly wealthy, as is people like Pelosi, as people like Feinstein, as people like the Bidens, etc. They've engaged in corrupt deals. They're globalists. They don't like our nation. They don't care about our borders. They have contempt for the average working American people. I don't care what your skin color is. I don't care if you live in inner city poverty, if you live in rural areas like I do. They don't care. They don't care about you, the average American. That's why they feign caring about foreign people, because they think America's bad. They think that people were born, they believe in cultural Marxism. They want a world without borders so that they can make more money and that their establishment friends could make more money. That's what it's about. And so when finally an outsider, or even a potential outsider if you don't like Trump, but here's someone they didn't at the time he won have their hooks in. They wanted Jeb Bush versus Hillary. The establishment could have lived with that. And so now all the shenanigans now that Trump won, whoops, it's all going to start to be outed. Places like Ukraine, places like China, places like the intel community and what they did to set Trump up and spy on his campaign. All of it now has the potential to be outed. But they have an ace up their sleeve. They have all these people in the intel community and in the State Department, and all these people left holdovers from all these agencies that could act as their ears and could leak to damage Trump and could be anonymous sources to the media, on and on and on. And that's what it's been about. Now, they're getting more and more desperate. They keep firing their shot and it keeps missing. Right? It was the FBI investigation. Well, that missed. Then it was the Mueller report. Well, that missed. Then it was the Mueller testimony. Well, that missed. Then they start to hear things like, because they know what's going on. Oh, man. Durham's investigation became a criminal one? What's this? They're talking to people in Italy? They're talking to other countries? That we had help us spy on Trump? Uh-oh. Now, they know this report's about to come out. Here's the irony. The media and the Democrats act like you already see them laying the groundwork. Oh, of course, they'll release the IG report or Durham, and they'll want to talk about that to distract from impeachment. When, as always, the truth is almost exactly what they're accusing others of. That's what the impeachment hearing's about. They know there's a almost 95% chance there's no way the Senate will remove Trump if he is impeached. They would have to get 20-something Republicans on board. Now, no doubt, if it only took 3 or 4 Republicans, there's enough never-Trumpers, establishment ones, they'd go ahead and pull the trigger to vote against Trump. But they ain't going to get 20. The backlash would be incredible. The Republican Party would wither overnight. It would collapse. Because people would say, why am I voting for these people? Unless they could find something so damning that it gives cover to these Republicans to vote him out. So what's it about? If they know he's not going to get impeached, yes, there is part of it that's general about, well, we could use the narrative to smear Trump and help us in the election. But the bigger part of it is discrediting the investigations. Now, this Ukraine part of it is just one small example of that. But if they could discredit the Ukraine investigation, then they could apply that to every investigation. And you already see it. People are calling for Barr's impeachment. People are already saying they don't trust IG Horowitz. People are saying they don't trust Durham. I'll get to more evidence today. People are automatically saying, oh, and I'll prove their double standard, right? Who's supposed to play Fortnite? I was going to say, I'm not very good at Fortnite. I've played it like half a minute. But anyways, so that's what's going on. So Vindman overhears this call. Now, consider who Vindman is and who the whistleblower Charmella is. Both of them have connections to the State Department, right? Charmella himself had specific connections with setting up meetings with people connected to Burisma and the State Department. Remember, this is all very confusing, right? Here's what we know for a fact. Joe Biden admitted that he issued a quid pro quo or bribery, extortion, whatever you want to call it, to the tune of a loan, guaranteed loan to the Ukraine with $1 billion of your tax dollars that was approved of by Congress, and he said he gave them 6 hours to fire the prosecutor who was looking into his son's company, or he would withdraw the aid. That's admitted. We know that was effective. They did fire the prosecutor. Now, I'll talk more about that specific later. Now, all of a sudden, Charmella, who's one of the people that helped facilitate lawyers for Burisma meeting people, Vindman, who was involved at the State Department, all of a sudden, their interests are going to be investigated. So Vindman and Ciaramella, the whistleblower, actually have a personal stake in not wanting an investigation to go on. So imagine what's happening here. We have a couple of deep state officials, right? And they realize they've been basically not playing fair for years under the previous administration. Now the new administration comes in and says, we would like to investigate what's going on here. So they know they have a huge advantage in that the media will spin any crappy story for them. And as will academia, and as will the entertainment industry, and as will Silicon Valley. So Vindman says, okay, I got to coordinate with people like Schiff. I got to coordinate with people like Ciaramella. So he starts talking to people. He's talking to lawyers. He's talking to all these people that are for the establishment Democrats and for the establishment. And here's the plan they come up with. Leak this call to as many people as you can. Then have someone anonymously blow the whistle. We'll have the intelligence community IG change the rules. Remember, they changed the paperwork, changed the rules that day to allow hearsay, secondhand information to protect you under a whistleblower statute. Because up until 3 days before the whistleblower filed his complaint, 3 days up until then, the paperwork specifically said, if you only have secondhand information, sorry, you don't qualify as a whistleblower. So they just happened to change it right then. Now we know, at the exact same time this is going on, the whistleblower is meeting with Adam Schiff's team. We know that many of the allegations made in the original whistleblower complaint just factually weren't true. But it didn't matter. Just like with the Mueller investigation and the FBI investigation, the idea is this. All we need is an excuse to start an investigation, and then we could run hog wild. And that's exactly what you see. That's exactly what Adam Schiff's doing. Remember, the media and the Democrats and Schiff, they all said, the whistleblower testifying is paramount. Everybody needs to hear from the whistleblower. His word, oh my goodness, the allegation. Now they're saying it would be redundant for him to talk. Who cares what the whistleblower says? It's not about that. We're on to other things now. That's always the case. Who cares if the dossier was fake and paid for by the Democrats and sourced by Kremlin officials? Who cares if that helped us start our investigation? Because Manafort's a crappy dude, so who cares? We got 12 Russian trolls out of it. Who cares, right? Who cares if the entire idea was started corruptly? Now, I've held two positions the entire way through this. All of the Russia shenanigans, all of the Ukraine shenanigans, everything. The first position, if Trump can provably committed some crime, he should be held accountable for it. I still feel that way to this day. I support Trump. I think he could do some things better, but overall, I think he's really great for this country, and he gives us a unique position to fight back for the first time in decades, the deep state corruption. But the other thing I believe is this. If you're a high-ranking politician, or you're a billionaire, or you're someone worth hundreds of millions of dollars, there's probably a 95% chance that you've broken some sort of law. Whether it be a tax evasion law, some sort of financial law. So I would argue that if you gave every politician in Washington the exact same treatment Trump got, where you bust in their lawyers' doors in the middle of the night, you check them years going back with a fine-tooth comb, all their records from decades going back, I would contend 95% you would be able to find crimes for and charge. All I want is equal application of the law. That's it. So if Trump goes down, fine. As long as you do give Pelosi and Feinstein and Schumer and Schiff and Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio, give them all the same treatment. Fine by me. But every single time we see it only goes one direction. Lying to the FBI, connected to Trump, we throw the book at you, put you in solitary confinement. Lying to the FBI, you're Mills and Aberdeen, which I've proven over and over again. No big deal, we'll give you immunity. Fail to register as a foreign lobbyist, Manafort, sorry, you sit in solitary confinement. What's that? He did the exact same crime with the exact same people, and he worked with the Podesta group, Hillary Clinton's campaign managers group. Oh, they're allowed to retroactively file paperwork. On and on and on and on and on. So that's what this was about. Vindman had a vested interest. He's someone who stands to lose because he was a supporter of the Obama administration, as was Ciaramella, who was directly involved. And don't forget, the biggest news story, I think, of possibly that's came out since this impeachment nonsense. Please check out my video I did on George Kent's testimony. George Kent's closed-door testimony admits that State Department officials like him, like Yovanovitch that testified, and other State Department officials pressured Ukraine to drop investigation into Obama allies, including into Ukrainian officials that admitted to interfering in the 2016 election to help Hillary. Let me repeat that. You know, foreign election interference, what we've been told for 3 years is the biggest thing in the world, that we have to leave no stone unturned in investigating. It's an act of war. We've been told that for 3 years. State Department officials have admitted that they pressured the Ukraine to drop investigations into Ukrainian officials for interfering in the election to help Hillary. So if you're part of this State Department, like Vindman, and all of your buddies, all of you war hawks that think we need to arm the Ukraine to fight Russia, we need to arm them. We all agree. You gotta give them any money they want. You gotta send them weapons. You gotta give them this. You gotta give them that. Or else Russia. That's what every witness has testified to, right? Every single one. What turns out, if Trump starts to investigating and he says, Zelensky, will you cooperate? And remember, this is important to remember, every single witness and all the Dems are claiming Zelensky's the real deal. He's a stand-up guy. And it makes sense. He probably is. I'm hoping he is. Let me sidetrack a little here for a second again. Understand the story of Ukraine. I'm no expert, but here's it in a nutshell. Ukraine's, ever since the Soviet Union, I'm guessing the people of Ukraine are very similar to me and you and everyone else, no matter what country you're from. You would like your elected officials to have your interest at heart. Not the interest of some country thousands of miles away. But sadly, because of the location of the Ukraine and geopolitics, it's been kind of a soft proxy war. Where you have Russia peddling influence, you have the United States and the West peddling influence. And so, let's just take it at face value. Yovanovitch, who's the president going back to like 2012 to 14, I don't know the exact dates. He was considered pro-Putin. Then there's a coup, which no doubt the U.S. was involved in. Who gets put in? Poroshenko. He's pro-Obama, pro-West. Now, we were told over and over, Obama's given billions of dollars aid. They're saying the only thing that's corrupt here is this one prosecutor, Shokin. They're working directly with Poroshenko to develop the NABU, basically the FBI of the Ukraine, to investigate corruption. Now we have Volker and other people testifying, well, the Poroshenko administration was horribly corrupt. Volker admits the head prosecutor under Poroshenko, named Litsenko, was horribly corrupt. I'm not so sure about that, but that's their claim. Yes, corruption's endemic in the Ukraine, they've all said. That's what all the witnesses have testified to. We don't blame Trump for being skeptical about corruption, because every single time someone gets elected, they're corrupt. And that's buttressed by the fact, even if you don't want to believe their testimony, why would 75% of Ukrainians vote for someone with no political experience, who is a stand-up comic, who ran on one issue? Everyone's corrupt in politics here. Vote for me, I'll out the corruption. A stand-up comic. And that's 75% of them voted for him. Then his group won the parliamentary elections as well, his party. That seems to be pretty clear evidence that the people of the Ukraine, they were tired of the administration they had. And they did think it was corrupt. Right? Now that corruption's going to be... Now you got this guy Zelensky. It's like, damn right I'm going to investigate corruption. Uh-oh. Vindman doesn't like that. The whistleblower Charmella doesn't like that. Their hands in the cookie jar now. My God, what if they find out that it was corrupt for Hunter Biden to be getting money? My God, what if they figure out that Joe Biden actually did want the prosecutor looking into his son fired so they could go to the NABU, their allied, the Obama allied agency that would then bury the case? That's what this is about. That's why Vindman told Charmella, the whistleblower. That's why Charmella blew the whistle. That's why State Department people, who are all in it together and had their hand in the cookie jar, are all saying, oh, we don't want any of these investigations. No. Almost every single witness has poo-pooed the idea of 2016 election interference from the Ukraine. When we have parliamentary members such as Sergei Leshchenko publicly admitting in 2016 in the Financial Times, yes, we interfered in the election. We released a black ledger, which, by the way, has never been proven to be true. It was about Paul Manafort. Not only has it not been proven to be true, but Mueller decided not to use any of that evidence to charge Manafort, and the Ukraine dropped the ledger and their investigation into Manafort immediately following Trump's win. Almost as if this was just garbage BS that they knew was garbage BS that they put out to smear Trump and force his campaign manager to step down. Huh. Now that's not a big deal. That's admitted. That's not me making this up. That's not someone's summation. That's not Rudy Giuliani saying that. That's Sergei Leshchenko admitting in August of 2016 to a mainstream media outlet in the United States, yes, I am working with the anti-corruption officials, in other words, the NABU, to publish this ledger and talk about it because we don't like Trump because we think he'd be an ally of Putin and that would hurt the Ukraine. He's quoted in that saying, I think most Ukrainian political figures are on our side with this and are cheering for Hillary. That's admitted. Politico 2017 goes into great detail how as this is going on, a DNC operative named Alexandra Chalupa is traveling to the Ukraine to get dirt on Trump, which she would get. Now, is this proof positive that she got the dirt and that's it? No, but we had far less evidence that warranted a 3-year investigation into Trump, so why isn't this reason for an investigation? The idea that Don Jr. met with a woman who called herself a Russian governmental official and didn't get any dirt, that was considered treason. That was considered, oh, we need to investigate. Don Jr. is going to jail. But all of a sudden, Alexandra Chalupa admitting, yes, I was in Ukraine talking to Ukrainian officials at the time that they were admitting to interfering in the election by giving out this black ledger. That's not reason to investigate? Yet every single one of these administrators, Volker and Morrison and Sondland, all of them said, 2016 election interference. I don't know why Trump would want to investigate that. Did they speak up when the Obama intel officials in July of 2016 were working with foreign Five Eyes assets and foreign former spies like Christopher Steele to investigate Donald Trump for meddling in the election? No, they all thought that was a very credible investigation. Turns out it was wrong. Turns out after 3 years, there wasn't proof that there was any improper collusion involving the 2016 election between Trump or any of his people and Russia. But still, no one said, that's absurd. How dare that we have this investigation? What did Volker say yesterday? I think that anytime you're asking a foreign country to get involved in domestic politics for any reason, it's horribly damaging. Didn't think that about Obama, did he? Didn't think that when 3 Democratic senators wrote a letter to the Ukraine in 2018 saying, boy, we heard that you're not going to cooperate with the Mueller investigation. We've supported you. We'd be highly disappointed if you stopped that cooperation. That was considered okay. These people are liars. That's what Vindman's about. So back to Sondland today, right? Yes, Sondland's belief was there was a quid pro quo. That's his presumption, as he's admitted. Key parts of this, he admits that Trump told him the exact opposite. He said no quid pro quo. He never gave any sort of extrapolation that meant a quid pro quo. He admits that no one ever told him quid pro quo, including Giuliani, or to condition aid. And he admits that other people could interpret it differently. So it's just his presumption. It's just another person's thought. This entire thing, everyone's admitted, by the way, that the transcript's accurate. Everyone. Even people like Vindman that are against Trump said, yeah, basically the transcript's accurate. Okay? So why do we need their feelings on the transcript? We could all read it. Is there a quid pro quo? No. Okay, next. That's it. Why do we need the Democrats constantly tell? This is a motif of theirs. They constantly have to tell us, well, here's a document out here that all the American people could read. But instead of reading it, we want to call on witnesses that think that it's bad, and they'll tell you that it's bad. How about you just read it and make up your own mind? Now here's the problem. We're 38 minutes in. And I'm going to talk about more of this tomorrow. But one of the other big thing that came out of the Sondland testimony today, right? And hear me out, and this is probably going to make a lot of people mad. The Republicans that are running this show are incompetent. I've been arguing this. Check my video out last night. I've been arguing this since day one. So let me go through a little spiel. Last night, I was talking about this at the end of my live stream. My connection's better tonight. I'm back home. So let me explain this to you. Now, for those of you who don't know, I was a debater. I was a decent debater in college. But it's more than that. It's more than having an expertise on how to make an argument. Because I'm not necessarily the greatest debater in the world. And There are regular dudes at the bar that can oftentimes out-argue me. But you have to think through. One of the things you learn in debate, there are defensive arguments you can make and offensive arguments you can make. If you're only making defensive arguments, you will lose. Period. Now, I'm going to grossly oversimplify what's going on, right? But I'm going to break it down into basically 4 main arguments. Argument number 1. There was shady stuff going on with the whistleblower. Okay? All right, fair enough. That's an argument. Argument number 2. There was no quid pro quo. Okay, fair enough. That's an argument. Argument number 3. The State Department officials pressured Ukrainians to drop investigations into pro-Obama people and into 2016 election interference. Okay? Argument number 4. It is not only allowed for Trump to want to investigate Biden, but it is his duty as the head of the branch of government charged with enforcing the law. Now, I'll break all 4 of those down to you, but what I would submit to you is that the order that the Republicans should be approaching these arguments is 4, 3, 2, 1. And the order they're going instead is 1, 2, 3, 4. In fact, barely touching 3 and 4. So the first argument that they seem to be focusing on is this idea of, is the whistleblower in connection with Schiff? Was Vindman connected to the whistleblower? All of this, testimony from the whistleblower. The whistleblower is not allowed to testify. People aren't being allowed to talk that they think are important testimony. They're not allowed to bring them in front. Those are all defensive arguments. Or another form of that is, release the transcripts. That's the only thing my congressmen in Pennsylvania have done. They signed legislation they signed a motion that said that Schiff should release the testimony. That's it. That's your big defense of Trump against this coup? Release the testimony. Wow. So glad I voted for you. Thanks. Doing a great job. That's where they're spending the majority of their effort. Now here's the problem, right? Think through this. Let's say you're not a Republican, you're not a Democrat, you're just some independent. In fact, you basically don't really pay attention to politics. But you stumble onto this and you're like, oh, okay, maybe I'm going to vote. Let's hear what you got. Let's hear both sides. I'm willing to hear anything, right? The Democrats are arguing on a different level. The Democrats' case that they're eventually going to make is, listen, if we can prove to you, the audience, or the American people, or the voter, that we think something shady went on, then who cares how it started? Who cares how we started to hear about this? All right, maybe they'll prove that the whistleblower was partisan. Who cares? I gave the example last night. I knew a situation where this happened, right? Someone gets a DUI or DWI, whatever you want to call it. They're trying to convince a bunch of people that they don't deserve this DUI or DWI. So here's the story. I was driving down the road, and I didn't use my turn signal on this kind of weird turn, and a cop pulled me over, and I was drunk, and he gave me a DUI. But then I looked into it, and technically you don't have to use a turn signal on that road. Therefore, I'm innocent. You can try that in a court of defense, but that's not what this impeachment process is. It's just trying to persuade the average person. The average person's going to look at that DUI case and be like, okay, but were you drunk? Oh, yeah, I was drunk. Okay. Then I really don't care whether or not the cop pulled you over for using your turn signal. I just don't care. It's the same situation here. Now, I'm not saying the Dems have proven their case, but the Dems are at least arguing on that level of, we're betting that most people aren't going to be concerned about the minutia of what are the laws and the technicality and who talked to who at one point, how exactly did this all start? People aren't going to care if you don't win the bigger argument that there isn't a case for impeachment. No one's going to come to the conclusion that's just an average run-of-the-mill person. No one's going to come to the conclusion, well, ultimately, I think there is a case to impeach Trump. I think what he did was very corrupt. But the fact that this whistleblower talked to Adam Schiff, now all of a sudden, nope, I'm against impeachment. No one's going to come to that conclusion. So why is that where the Republicans are putting the majority of their effort? Now, number 2, today's testimony proves why number 2 is a bad strategy. Not bad, but not the most effective. Which the argument is there is no quid pro quo. Now, I don't know if there was a quid pro quo. But my argument from day one has been, you don't even have to argue that. You could be like, you know what, we'll concede there was a quid pro quo. You know why? Because Trump is absolutely right to want these investigations. If there's a reason to investigate 2016 election interference, if there's a reason to investigate Burisma, and if there's a reason to investigate the Bidens, then there is no case for impeachment. In fact, the very fact that you're then trying to bring a case for impeachment for investigating obvious corruption proves that you're trying to cover up corruption. That's the argument. But instead they say there's no quid pro quo. Okay, so that's the debate you're getting in with the Democrats. Now you're playing their game. That's the Democrats' offense. The Democrats are saying, if there's a quid pro quo, impeach. They're also saying more than that because they're insane. But that's their big pitch they're making. They're calling it bribery or extortion or quid pro quo. If that exists, then impeach. So then objective people here today, what do they hear? They get some guy like Sondland to come on and says, I think there was a quid pro quo. Oh, there we go. That's the case for impeachment. So I see a bunch of people on Twitter that are on the fence. Like one of them's Eric Weinstein that I follow is a professor. Liberal guy. He's like, oh, this is it. Damning. Nail in the coffin. Now, I'm not saying everyone thought that, but that's the danger you get because you've then ceded the ground. When you say, our defense is there was no quid pro quo, you're implicitly saying, well, if there was a quid pro quo, it would be shady, but there wasn't one. It's a defensive argument. It's not a good argument. It's an argument to be had, and if you really believe there wasn't a quid pro quo, sure, you could bring it up, and that's what I spent the first half hour of this video doing. But it's not the best argument. Now, the arguments I made, arguments 3 and 4, and they're basically interchangeable. These are offensive arguments. If you win these arguments, you could lose the bottom 2 arguments, and it doesn't matter. Because the average person will be like, I don't care if you're right about the whistleblower being corrupt. I don't care if it was a quid pro quo, because it has thoroughly been proven to me that Trump was well within his rights to want to investigate corruption. Do you see how that works? Yet that's the exact case that the Republicans aren't making. They've had so many chances, witness after witness, to nail this home. And every time they drop the ball, sometimes they start down the road and then pull back. If I was the counsel for the Republicans for Kasser, I'm not a lawyer, but if you put me up there, the case for impeachment would be done. Over. Finished. Period. So let's talk about the 2 arguments I'm discussing here. Argument number 1, which I called argument number 3 before. And you could interchange these in issue of importance. George Kent, one of the star witnesses for the Democrat, admitted that the State Department pressured the Ukraine to drop investigation into Obama allies unto election interference. Now you have to understand, you're trying to convince the American people. That's something they can understand. The American people have been told for 3 years by the Democrats, foreign interference, foreign interference, foreign interference. It's an act of war. It's the most important thing. We were told it's so severe that just Russian trolls posting on Pokemon Go and Twitter and Facebook, they needed to be charged. Charges needed to be brought against them. We had to have meetings on Capitol Hill how to end fake news. Yes, I know the Democrats alleged that there was also a hacking portion, but half of Mueller's case for the Democrats interfering with us were these trolls. Independent of the hacking and the emails and the WikiLeaks, independent of that, they cite this all the time. We know the Mueller investigation was worthwhile. Look at all the people that were indicted. Look at those 12 trolls that were indicted. Oh my God, they were trying to bring down America. That was just them spreading gossip. By the way, gossip that a judge's ruled wasn't directed by Putin. There's no evidence it was directed by Putin. Gossip that majoritarily wasn't shared until after the election, most of the videos. Gossip that was less than 1% of the money that was spent on the election. Gossip that much of it was anti-Trump in a way, such as it was pro-Black Lives Matter, pro-LGBT. Gossip that after the election, those same trolls were leading rallies that were attended by hundreds of people against Trump. But nonetheless, despite all that, it was a huge deal. Huge deal. because it was foreign election interference. Anytime we have people from another government trying to interfere in our system and sway people on who to vote for, that's a huge deal. The American people have had that drilled into their heads for 3 years. So how aren't the Republicans saying, okay, this is what you've said for 3 years, right? Yep. Now you keep saying that people like Litsenko are corrupt. Yep. And you're saying when Giuliani and when Giuliani's telling Trump that Yovanovitch, the former ambassador, is corrupt, that's because it came from Litsenko, and that's a lie. Yep. And what did Volker and all them say? They've constantly said the smears against Yovanovitch that have been debunked. Notice they never say what the smear was and what exactly was debunked. They just keep saying it was debunked. It was debunked. Well, what were the smears? Let's be technical. What were the smears? I've heard two. One was that she said mean things about Trump. I really don't care. The second was a more serious allegation. That she had pressured prosecutors in the Ukraine to drop cases. Particularly cases that would negatively affect the Obama administration. Which in itself is bad, but also had the unique effect of pissing off the Ukraine. Because if you're a prosecutor in the Ukraine and you have this U.S. keeps saying, hey, by the way, you can't look at that guy. You get pretty tired of it. Remember? That's the entire argument that Volker made and Taylor made. Oh, if Trump's pressuring them to investigate someone, that'll hurt our relations because that makes prosecutors fearful that they're under the boot of the United States. That's exactly what State Department was doing. Okay? So Litsenko, John Solomon does this interview where Litsenko's talking to Giuliani and other people, and he's talking to Solomon, and they write the article, and it says, Litsenko said that he was basically given a do not prosecute list. Now, the entire media went nuts because supposedly Litsenko recanted. That's what the media story was. Oh, John Solomon's a liar. Litsenko said that never happened. No, he didn't. Litsenko, then the New York Times had to admit, actually said, well, there wasn't literally a list. It's a colloquialism, right? English isn't your first language. You're hearing it through an interpreter. So he didn't mean to say there's a physical list. He meant to say she gave him names and said, don't prosecute these people. Now, that's supposedly debunked. That's what we're told, right? So I go back to this. And I'm not going to bring him up here. Maybe I will. You can read George Kent's testimony for yourself if you want to see this, but here's from John Solomon's article. Quoting, my sources told me specifically the U.S. Embassy had pressured the Ukraine prosecutors in 2016 to drop or avoid pursuing several cases, including one involving the Soros-backed Anti-Corruption Action Center and 2 cases involving Ukrainian officials who criticized Donald Trump and his campaign manager Manafort. To back up their stories, my sources provided me with a letter from then embassy official, you ready for this? George Kent. Does that name sound familiar? Well, that was one of the first 2 witnesses that the Democrats bought for impeachment. That's their star witness. He's the one he said Yovanovitch was great. It was terrible that she got fired for these smears. What were the smears again? Notice they don't say what they were. But they say it was smears Litsenko was saying. What's Litsenko saying? He's saying, Yovanovitch told me to drop these cases. So to back up his story, here's a letter from George Kent, further quoting, who proving it happened. State officials authenticated the letter, and Kent recently acknowledged in his testimony he signed that letter. Here's the letter. Let me bring it up for you. Hopefully. Get out of here. Go away, you. This is to prosecutor's office. Let me scroll down. Who's it signed by? There it is. See it? George Kent. What's he say? Let's go 3rd paragraph from the top. They're writing to alleviate fears from prosecutors in the Ukraine that money they were sending was being improperly spent by people. So this is the 3rd to last paragraph, and I'll just read from here. That's the context of the letter. Quote, we are completely satisfied that the assistance in question has only been used for the purposes and, as stated above, did not see any grounds from our perspective as the donor who provided the assistance for an investigation into their use. Given the above, we reject allegations that Mr. Sekverelis or anyone within the Prosecutor General's office with whom we worked could have misused these funds since they were never under their control. Now listen to this part carefully. the investigation into the actions of the Anti-Corruption Action Center based on the assistance they have received from us is similarly misplaced. In other words, we know that you're investigating the Anti-Corruption Action Center, that Soros was giving money, and Obama's State Department was giving money to, which is why he says, based on the assistance they received from us, that investigation is misplaced. Let's go further. As voiced by European Union Ambassador Jan Tobinski, we are gravely concerned about this investigation, for which we see no basis, and which appears to us to be an attempt to intimidate those in the Prosecutor General's office most committed to combating corruption, as well as non-governmental partners and outspoken anti-corruption activists. Next line. United States is committed to supporting reforms within the Prosecutor General's office and building its capacity to meet citizens' demands to recover stolen assets. What is it they accused Trump of when the transcript came out? Well, yes, he never says quid pro quo. He never says demand. But he mentions that the U.S. has given aid to them, and then he asks for a request. That proves it's a quid pro quo. What's this do exactly here? We're very troubled by this investigation, and we think the investigation into them is corrupt. It's so corrupt people can run it. And don't forget, we're committed to giving you money and supporting reforms. The exact same thing they accused Trump of. Again! That's the biggest story in the country right now. Now, let's go further with this, right? This is more from Sullivan's articles. Quote, I provided the names that Litsenko claimed he had been cited to by the embassy. That would be Yovanovitch. Names that Yovanovitch told him to drop investigations of. The senior official said he couldn't speak to what transpired in the specific meeting between Yovanovitch and Litsenko, but that official then provided me this surprising confirmation. Quote, I can confirm to you that at least some of these names are names the U.S. Embassy in Kiev raised with the general prosecutor because we were concerned about retribution or unfair treatment of Ukrainians viewed as favorable by the United States. And who are they talking about the United States? The Obama administration. Sullivan says, quote, in other words, state was confirming its own embassy has engaged in pressure on Ukrainian prosecutors to drop certain law enforcement cases, just as Litsenko and other officials had alleged. So what smear again has been debunked? It's just a conspiracy theory against Yovanovitch? Because according to actual George Kent and other state official department people, they're saying yes, that's exactly what happened. But it goes on. Quote, more recently, George Kent, the embassy's charge d'affaires in 2016, and now a deputy assistant to the Secretary of State and the Democrats' first impeachment witness, confirmed in impeachment testimony that he personally signed the April 2016 letter demanding Ukraine drop the case against the Anti-Corruption Action Center. He also testified he was aware of pressure the U.S. Embassy also applied on Ukraine prosecutors to drop investigations against a journalist named Vitaly Shubunyan, a parliamentary member named Sergei Lyshenko, and a senior law enforcement official named Artem Sitnik. Shubunyan helped for the Anti-Corruption Action Center that Soros funded, and Lyshenko and Sitnik were criticized by a Ukrainian court for interfering in the 2016 election by improperly releasing or publicizing secret evidence on the ongoing case against Manafort. Let's just talk about Sitnik specifically. So, quote, as for Sitnik, the head of the NABU Anti-Corruption Police, do you get that? Does that name sound familiar, the NABU? Let's talk about who the NABU is for a minute. So George Kent admits in his testimony that the way things are done when you're trying to end corruption in a country, they start with law enforcement. So you first get law enforcement people that you can trust and train them. Then you get people in the legal system, lawyers and judges and prosecutors. Then finally you could work at the political level. But they start with law enforcement. So one of the things that the Trump administrations first started doing when Poroshenko won the election after this coup, they made their aid conditional on setting up an anti-corruption investigative agency. That agency would be called the NABU. Now the NABU would be the case that ultimately, after Joe Biden admitted to getting the prosecutor looking into his son's company fired, the case would go to the NABU. The NABU picks up that case and basically buries it. So strange that the Biden defense and those defending him is, no, Biden wanted his son's company investigated harder Oh, okay. And it's just a coincidence that it went to his allies who then buried the case. But that's what we're told. That same NABU, right? Now, what did this NABU do? Let's see again. Sitnick, the head of the NABU anti-corruption police, Kent added, this is a quote from George Kent, Democrat witness, star witness, who had a problem with Trump trying to interfere in investigations in Ukraine. He had a big problem with it, right? He says that all the allegations against Yovanovitch have been debunked. What's George Kent say this? Here's a quote from him. You can look it up in his testimony. It's on page 70. Quote, we warned both Litsenko and others that efforts to destroy the NABU as an organization, listen to this, including opening up investigations of Sitnick, threaten to unravel a key component of our anti-corruption cooperation. Let me read that slowly again. We warned Litsenko, opening up investigations of Sitnick, threatened to unravel a key component of our anti-corruption cooperation. In other words, if you investigate Sitnick, maybe we ain't cooperating anymore. And what was the cooperation? $1 billion loan. Tons of other aid and loan that was going to the Ukraine. So basically, State Department officials said, if you investigate interference into the 2016 election by Lyshenko and this guy Sitnick, that's going to jeopardize us continuing to cooperate with you. Now that's a bombshell. Have you heard anyone talking about this? No one. That's what every Republican should be talking about. Now, they had George Kent in front of them. They had Yovanovitch in front of them. They had Volker in front of them. They had Sondland in front of them. They had Taylor in front of them. All people from the State Department. They let them say over and over, the idea that there was election interference, that's a myth. That's been debunked. The idea that what Litsenko said, Litsenko's corrupt. Everything he said's been debunked. When George Kent, their own witness, is admitting, that's actually true. We did, in fact, pressure all the time. All the time. It just so happened their pressure was always to get cases dropped that benefited the Obama administration. Every single time. Now, given all that, did Trump have a right to fire Yovanovitch? Let's assume, let's go closer here. Let's even say this. Let's say you hear all that and you're like, I'm still not convinced. Maybe there's some sort of explanation. This is all conspiracy theory. I'm not convinced, right? But Trump could have been convinced. One, because it's true, because we have the people actually quoting it. But all that matter was, did Trump have a legitimate concern to think, wow, there might be a lot of corruption going on here. Yovanovitch might have done something really corrupt. Of course he had a reason to maybe believe that. So he had every reason to fire her. He's allowed to fire for whatever reason he wants anyways. And if he thought these shenanigans were going on, of course he had every right and duty to ask Ukraine, I want you to investigate what's going on. We had this ambassador. We hear she was crappy. Don't you think the American people have a right to know? If we were told for 3 years that foreign election interference is tantamount to an act of war, that no stone must be left unturned in order to investigate it, why would we then not be interested when unelected bureaucrats are pressuring and threatening aid to another country if they don't drop investigations into foreign election interference? The Democrats are saying, not only do we not want that investigated, we think it's impeachable if Trump tries to do it. And these damn ambassadors and all the State Department people are allowed to get in front of the Republicans, and they're so incompetent that none of them actually talk about the testimony of George Kent. That this happened. They just let them keep saying, it's all been debunked, it's been debunked, it's been debunked. Instead, they're saying, well, we'd like to see the whistleblower. We'd like the whistleblower to testify. And we don't think there was a quid pro quo. If what George Kent said is true, and State Department officials were pressuring the Ukraine to drop investigations into election interference and into corruption of people that the Obama administration was paying, then not only, I don't care if Trump gave a quid pro quo. Great, he should. We know all the time the Obama administration issued quid pro quos. We know the entire defense of Biden's quid pro quo was, well, as long as it's to fight corruption, it's legitimate. Does it get more corrupt than actual officials at the State Department covering up for foreign election interference that benefited their candidate? You don't have to breathe a word about quid pro quo. You could literally start your defense with this. We don't care who the whistleblower is, and sure, we'll say there was a quid pro quo. There was incredible corruption that needed to be investigated. So all of it's justified. That's it. And the American people will understand that. Yep, makes sense. Now, what's the other case? Joe Biden. That's the other piece of offense. What are the three things that you heard over and over said in the past 2 days that Trump wanted investigated? Burisma, which I guess I'll get to that first. 2016 election interference. Okay, I just got to that. Not only do we have admissions from officials, not only has a Ukrainian court found guilty Leshchenko and Sitnik, the head of the NABU and a parliamentarian, of interfering in the 2016 election. Not only do we have their quotes in U.S. mainstream media outlets proving it, not only do we have credible information that a Democratic operative may have been soliciting that dirt, which is exactly what we had a 3-year investigation into Trump of, but we actually have State Department officials admitting they were trying to bury the investigation. So yes, it's very credible that Trump should investigate it. And State Department officials saying, we don't think it was a big deal to investigate, their opinion means squat, considering they're implicated in burying the investigation. Do you think, for example, George Kent has a stake in it not coming out at this point? That there was Ukrainian election interference? After all, every single one of them said it's a joke, it's a joke, it's a joke, it's been debunked. So if there's now an actual investigation into it, and it proves it wasn't a joke, well, it turns out that the Democrat defense that we hear constantly, everybody at State Department thought so, everybody in the Intel Department thought so, so therefore it must be true. Well, that's right out the window, right? Everybody in the Intel Department thought that Trump and his people colluded with Russia. That was a lie. Turns out they were doing all kinds of shady things to try to set Trump up. Same with the State Department. But every time, that's the defense that we hear. Oh, well, everybody at State thought that, what was the official U.S. policy? It's nonsense. But the Republicans aren't pushing back. So one, yes, there should have been an investigation in the 2016 election interference. Number two, Burisma. This one's easy. Should there be an investigation into Burisma? For God's sakes, the Democrat defense is it was okay for Joe Biden and Barack Obama to withhold aid because companies like Burisma were being left off the hook by a corrupt prosecutor. Okay, simple case. In other words, the Obama administration did it. No one batted an eye. Every single witness has admitted Burisma's corrupt. The EU, the IMF, the Obama administration, Biden, all of these witnesses, all of them say Burisma and Zlochevsky, the owner of the company, are corrupt. And they should be investigated. And they went into specifics. People like Kent went into specifics. They stole hundreds of millions of dollars from the Ukrainian people. That's what they said. Therefore, there should be an investigation. Great. Yeah, agreed. So what's the problem if Trump wanted Burisma investigated? Number two, down the road. Down easy. Yes, he should have wanted them investigated. Okay, so 2016 election interference should be investigated. Burisma should be investigated. Now the big trump card, the one the Democrats are going over. But he mentioned the Bidens. So that's the big problem, right? So should the Bidens be investigated? Now you've probably heard me say this if you watch my channel. Let me make a simple statement. I'm sick and tired of partisanism, meaning that we defend corruption on our side. We need to have a baseline of things, and that includes me. So let me just give you a scenario that should always be investigated. It's going to be wordy, but I'll break it down real simple for you after I say it. Anytime an executive official, a high-ranking executive official, threatens to withhold congressionally approved aid to a foreign country on the condition that they fire a prosecutor who is looking into a company that one of their family members is on, there should be an investigation. Anytime a president, vice president, someone in the executive branch says, I want this prosecutor fired and I'm going to threaten to withhold congressional aid unless you fire him, and that prosecutor happens to be looking in their son's company, That warrants an investigation. Now you might say, but Rob, what if everyone in the EU says that it was okay to want that guy fired? I don't care. But Rob, what if Rachel Maddow and Anderson Cooper and everyone else in the media wanted that prosecutor fired? I don't care. But Rob, what if the Biden or whoever the executive official was that wanted the prosecutor fired says, in reality, I want this prosecutor fired because he's not investigating my son's company hard enough? I don't care. That's not the way things work. If a bunch of people would have said, well, it was okay. We think it was okay for Richard Nixon to go in, the Watergate thing. We think it was okay. Would the Dems and the media have said, oh, fair enough. A bunch of people thought it was okay. That's not the way our legal system works. Now, I've gone into this detail over and over again. Look at every single article from the mainstream media that's defending Biden on this. Almost everyone will say something like this. We admit there was an appearance of a conflict of interest for Hunter Biden to be on the board of Burisma while his dad was in charge of basically getting the owner of that company booted out of the Ukraine. But there's no proof that that had anything to do with the reasoning of why Biden wanted this prosecutor fired. So they admit there was, quote, an appearance of a conflict of interest. Now let's break that down. What is a conflict of interest? A conflict of interest is where one person, because of two positions in their life, those two positions are telling them to act in different ways based on what would be the best interest for those situations. So for example, let's just give a real simple sports analogy. Let's say you're the quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers, but you're also the owner of the New York Giants. And the 49ers play the Giants. Now you have a conflict of interest because your position as owner of the Giants dictates that you're trying to help the Giants win. But your position as the quarterback of the 49ers dictates you're trying to help the 49ers win. Real simple, right? A conflict of interest in politics would be you're in charge of investigating or removing corruption while at the same time one of your family members is benefiting from one of the corrupt people you're trying to get removed. That's exactly what happened with Joe Biden. Now, I've had people say, you can't prove Hunter Biden was committing any crime. It's not a crime for him to get a bunch of money. So therefore, there's no conflict of interest. That's ridiculous. I don't even have to allege Hunter Biden committed a crime. Was Hunter Biden making $83,333 a month on average from Burisma? Yep. Could a father legitimately not want his son to lose $83,000 a month? Sure, that's well within the realm of possibility. Okay. Then that dad shouldn't be involved in prosecutorial decisions of that son's company. Period. It doesn't matter if everyone says, well, yeah, but that prosecutor was corrupt. That's irrelevant. That could even be true, by the way. It could be true that the EU and the IMF and Rachel Maddow and Anderson Cooper and everyone else, they could be right when they say Shokin, that prosecutor was corrupt. I don't know, but they could be right. That still doesn't legitimize Biden being the point man on making that decision. It's still a conflict of interest. Now, when they say an appearance of a conflict of interest, so I've explained what a conflict of interest is. The appearance of it would be, well, even if there's not a conflict of interest, a reasonable or objective person could look at it and say, well, maybe there is. And so the idea is you should avoid the appearance of conflict of interest. In other words, politically, it's not a defense to say, well, I know this looked like a conflict of interest, but really it wasn't. Our government says you should seek to even avoid the appearance. There should be no question, right? That's the standard. But somehow they were okay with what Biden did. Now keep in mind, the appearance was just having Hunter Biden work for Burisma. The actual conflict of interest, because the idea is, well, the appearance should be avoided because if not, then it could actually lead to a situation where a conflict of interest arises. That's exactly what happened. Even if you don't think Biden acted corruptly, it is indisputable that Biden threatening to get the prosecutor fired with congressionally approved aid that was looking into his son's company is in fact a conflict of interest, even if he did it for all the right reasons. And if Joe Biden's innocent and he didn't do anything wrong, and the fact his son worked for Burisma didn't factor into it, then he would admit to you, look, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm totally fine with an investigation into myself because I understand this looks really freaking bad. So go ahead and investigate. I got nothing to hide. But that's not what Biden's saying. Biden's saying, how dare someone try to investigate me? It should be impeachable. That's it. No other evidence necessary. You had an executive branch member? Yep. And they threatened to withhold tax dollars in the form of congressional aid? Yep. To fire a prosecutor looking into their family's company? Yep. Okay, investigate. I don't care if they're Republican or Democrat. I don't care if their names are Obama or Clinton or Trump or Bush. I don't care. And you know, if you have any sliver of honesty in your body, I don't care if you're the biggest Trump hater in the world, you know, if this situation would be Donald Trump and Don Trump Jr., if it turned out that a country that we're working with, say India is investigating a company that Don Jr. is on the board of directors of, and Congress approves aid to India for whatever, to help improve their energy infrastructure. And Trump comes out and says, I'm not going to improve that aid. You're not going to get that aid unless you fire the prosecutor that's looking at Don Jr.'s company. Do you think that they would accept, the Democrats and the media would accept as a defense? Well, a bunch of people said that prosecutor was corrupt. The media and the Democrats would be flying that prosecutor to the United States to participate in hearings against Trump immediately, day one. He'd be a hero. He'd be on the cover of Time magazine and People magazine. He'd be on CNN every night. The New York Times would be doing huge pieces on this prosecutor. But because it's Biden, it's okay. Volker said, why did Volker say? They said yesterday at the end, Schiff said, I hope that Volker's testimony has finally debunked the Biden thing that the Republicans are saying. How did Volker debunk it? What did he say? Did anybody hear it? This is what Volker said. Oh, I just thought it was absurd. Now, I think, yes, there could have been Ukrainians trying to use Hunter Biden's position to benefit themselves. But it's just absurd to think that Joe Biden would do anything inappropriate. He gives two reasons. The first, and this is the most laughable thing I've ever heard. And again, the crappy Republicans didn't mock this out of the room. The first thing he said was, well, you know, Biden was vice president, and I just don't think someone of the office of vice president would behave corruptly. Okay, Volker, if you think that, then wouldn't that mean that you would also assume that someone in the office of the president, i.e. Donald Trump, also couldn't behave corruptly? You dolt. It's the dumbest thing I've heard in these testimony. But the second thing he said was, I know Biden. I've known Biden for years. He's a great guy. So I know he didn't do anything corrupt. And Schiff says, well, that proves it. Oh, that's the standard now? If we have a career diplomat vouch that you can't be corrupt, no need for an investigation. Hey, Me Too movement, guess what? You need to shut up, because as long as a career diplomat or someone with a lot of money or an impressive position says, nah, I know Bill Cosby, he wouldn't have did that to those ladies. Oh, okay, case closed, no need for an investigation. Anyone's going to remotely believe this? Meanwhile, you have Volker saying, I feel it's inappropriate for U.S. officials to be interfering in the prosecutorial process of another country and ask for investigations. Well, intuitively, would it also be inappropriate to ask them to bury investigations? And again, the Republicans don't make this point. Here's another point along the same vein. They try to get away with this. The Democrats try to say, because they're saying the motivations are what's important. So they're saying Biden's motivations were to fight corruption, but Trump's were to get dirt in his opponent. And that's election interference. That's what they say. If you're going to someone and trying to get dirt in your opponent from them, that's election interference. But there's more than one way to have election interference. You could also be seeking interference from a foreign country to help you in the election by having them bury investigations into you. So you could get them to get dirt in your opponent or have investigations on your opponent, or you could get them to bury dirt about you or bury investigations into you. And I know the Democrats believe this. You want to know why? Remember the whole Stormy Daniels debacle? The entire case there was this. Supposedly Trump had worked through an intermediary to pay the leader or the owner of the National Enquirer to buy stories and then bury the stories. And they said that was campaign violations because that was seeking to benefit Trump politically. In other words, burying stories was to benefit Trump for the election. Now, if a foreign entity is doing that, that is foreign interference into burying stories to help in the election. That's exactly what it's alleged Biden did. That's exactly what the State Department was doing. But again, the Republicans won't make this point. And the last thing, you probably heard me say this over and over. The other defense of Biden, which is everybody said that Shokin was corrupt, so it was okay to fire him. I remember when we had to have a 2-year Mueller investigation. Does anyone remember why the Mueller investigation started? It was because we had this FBI director, his name was James Comey, and every Democrat hated him because they thought he cost Hillary the election, right? And they all said fire him. And then all the Republicans hated him because they thought that his explanation of why he didn't charge Hillary was a joke. No one liked Comey. From Rachel Maddow to Sean Hannity, people were like, this guy sucks. He's corrupt or he's inept. Everybody wanted him out. In fact, the deputy director of the FBI, Rod Rosenstein, he also wanted Comey out. He wrote a letter recommending to Trump that he fire Comey. So you had basically everyone that mattered saying Comey should go. So what's Trump do? Trump fires Comey, right? That's what happened. And all of a sudden, Rosenstein's suspicious. He says, wait a minute. I just wrote a letter recommending Trump fire Comey. I find it very suspicious that Trump fired Comey. I know. I'll appoint a special prosecutor, a special counsel to look into this. I'll happen to choose Comey's mentor. Now, as ridiculous as that story is, do you recall one Democrat or one person in the mainstream media saying, wait, what? Investigate Trump for what? We all said Comey should be fired. So, this is absurd to recommend starting an investigation. No, quite the opposite. They said, well, it doesn't matter what we all said because we know the reason Trump fired him was to personally benefit himself. And there needs to be an investigation. Well, the same thing would apply to Biden. Doesn't matter that everyone said Shokin should be fired. The truth of the matter is, it could have benefited Biden personally. And by the way, the end of this story, what was the end result? The investigation got kicked to the Biden-Obama allied NABU, and they buried the investigation. The Republicans need to go on offense. Volker says, I know Biden's a good guy. He couldn't have done anything corrupt. Absurd. 2016 election interference from Ukraine's debunked. Absurd. 5-minute increments these Republicans get. How aren't you spending... I'd be trying to talk as fast as possible. I have so much to say about all of it. So you're saying it would be improper for someone in the United States, such as Trump or one of his deputies or someone in his State Department, to be telling prosecutors in the Ukraine what to do with their domestic investigation? Yes, that's what I'm saying. That's what Volker said. That's what Sondland said. That's what all these people said, right? Okay, here's George Kent admitting they did that exactly in the situation of the Anti-Corruption Action Center. Do you justify that? And they'll probably say, well, that was different. That was part of a greater policy. Also, it was okay to force them to pressure them to drop an investigation into a group that Obama was paying for. Oh, cool. Okay, next. Here's Sergei Leshchenko. He admitted to interfering in the 2016 election, releasing the Black Ledger. Now, a Ukrainian court said that Leshchenko and the head of the NABU, named Artemis Sitnik, they found them guilty of interfering in the 2016 election to help Hillary. Do you think it would be inappropriate to pressure the Ukraine to drop that investigation? And just get these supposedly expert witnesses. Get them in front of the American people to basically admit, well, no, when we do it, it's okay. But we don't, because we think we can run the show. But if Trump does it, then all of a sudden it's illegitimate. Get them to admit that. Get them to talk about how bad it is what Biden did. We keep hearing these polls. 53% of people think that Trump should be impeached. 53% of people think it's illegitimate for Trump to ask a foreign country to investigate his rival. You see any polls that say, how many people think it's legitimate for the vice president to force the firing of the prosecutor looking into his son? How many people think, $1 billion of your tax dollars, how many people think that's legitimate? And by the way, the last thing I'll say on this, everyone's unanimous, right? All these witnesses, all these experts at the State Department, they're all unanimous. It's a joke to say things like there was a problem with 2016 Ukrainian election interference. It's a joke. It's a joke to say that Biden could have done anything inappropriate. So if we have an investigation eventually, and it proves that's not the case, can we stop pretending these people are experts that we should listen to? Now, something I talked about yesterday, and I'm going to briefly hit on because I think that it applies to the next story I want to talk to, is as follows. Volker testifies that Zelensky's unique, that Trump had every right to think that the Ukrainians were bad people because, quote, corruption is endemic in the Ukraine, right? It's one of the most corrupt places. That's what all the witnesses are saying. Okay, got it. Okay, good so far. Everyone's in agreement. That would mean that Poroshenko, the previous president, is corrupt. I already went through this. 75% of the people voted against Poroshenko and voted for a stand-up comic whose only issue was ending corruption. So it's clear the Ukrainians thought the Poroshenko administration was corrupt. Volker and others have admitted as much. The Obama administration was giving billions of dollars of aid to that corrupt administration. At the same time, they were telling us, oh, we had to fire this prosecutor because we don't want to give aid to corrupt people. Now, the State Department didn't push back on that aid. In fact, they've said, the ones that have been there long enough have said, oh, this has always been our policy. In fact, we wanted Obama to send more aid. We wanted him to send javelins. And we were happy that Trump sent javelins. That's what they testified to, right? This has been the State Department policy on Ukraine since 2014. That's what they testified to. They didn't say, whoa, we realized Poroshenko was corrupt and we said stop sending him aid. They said they've consistently said we need to send them aid. Now they're admitting, and we know Poroshenko was corrupt. So they're now admitting that the geniuses at the State Department were advocating giving billions of dollars to a corrupt administration, based on their own words. Okay? And they all are unanimous that Zelensky's the real deal. Finally, he's going to end corruption, right? They've all said that as well. It's the real deal. Okay, that's going to be an important backdrop for this next story, which I think is an incredible story. And I'm going to do a video on this alone tomorrow. But a special bonus on my live stream for those of you watching. One of the things that you've heard the Democrats say and a lot of these witnesses say, oh, it's a shame, it would be terrible for Trump to basically demand investigations because that makes our diplomacy weaker. It makes Russia think that we're weak. It makes Ukrainians think that they need to do special favors in order to gain the cooperation of the United States, and it's very damaging to our diplomacy, right? That's what they say. It could force Ukraine to start investigations for domestic political reasons in the United States. Right? Got it? Okay. Let me read you a story. I'll bring it up here so you can follow along with me. Maybe you've heard of a magazine called Time Magazine. Now, Time Magazine, not very Trump-friendly, right? By no means a right-wing rad. Let me read this story. This is from today. You haven't heard this get much media coverage, have you? This isn't Fox News. This isn't Sean Hannity. It's not John Solomon. Time. Ready? Here's the title. Ukraine wants to probe the company that paid Hunter Biden. But it's too sensitive. Interesting. Let's see what they have to say. This is from Simon Schuster in Kiev. November 20th, today. Let's just start reading. Quote, one of the troubling questions at the center of the impeachment inquiry, at least for Republicans, has been the work that Hunter Biden did for Burisma, one of Ukraine's largest gas companies, while his father was serving as vice president. But the intensity of interest in Washington is only making it more difficult to resolve the mystery. To this day, listen to this paragraph. To this day, Burisma's connection to Hunter Biden has made it much harder for Ukrainian authorities to investigate the company for corruption. Current and former officials in the Ukraine tell Time. In that sense, Burisma is still getting its money's worth for the reported $50,000 per month it paid the younger Biden to sit on its board from 2014 to earlier this year. Do you get that? Do you hear what Time Magazine just said? Ukrainian officials can't even get off the ground investigating Burisma because Hunter Biden was there. Now, all the witnesses admitted Burisma, it's been policy since 2014 to want Burisma and its owner Zlochevsky investigated. And we know that Joe Biden and Barack Obama both said we want Zlochevsky and Burisma to be taken down. And we think the prosecutor Shokin is corrupt for not wanting that investigation. And we know that Kent, and we know that Taylor, and we know that Sondland, and we know that Volker have all testified, yes, it would be very reasonable to want to investigate Burisma because it's an open secret that it's very corrupt. And here are Ukrainian officials admitting to left-wing left-wing, full-out left-wing, Time magazine. We can't investigate Burisma like we wanted to because Hunter Biden was there. That's incredible. And the story gets worse for the Democrats. If that's the case, then why the hell shouldn't Trump be telling Ukraine, I want to know what's going on with Hunter Biden? We know this Zlochevsky and Burisma is corrupt. If Ukrainian officials are saying we can't do anything because Hunter Biden was on the board, why wouldn't Trump have every right to say, I want that looked at? If your country is unwilling to investigate oligarchs that the entire world, including the Obama and Biden administration, said was corrupt because Hunter Biden's on the board of directors, then we ain't giving you aid because you're clearly corrupt. And the fact that Joe Biden had the prosecutor fired also deserves to be looked into. Let's keep going. Time magazine. Ukraine's government insists that it has no evidence of wrongdoing by Hunter Biden or his father. But Burisma, they say, is a different story. Since taking office in May, the government has sought to explore past claims of corruption against Burisma and its owners. Yet, you ready for this? As an unintended consequence of the impeachment inquiry, Ukraine has felt the need to treat the company with kid gloves. Let me reread that for a second. As an unintended consequence of the impeachment inquiry, Ukraine has felt the need to treat the company, that's Burisma, with kid gloves. I'm coming back to you for a second. Do you realize what this means? Now, the entire narrative from all these witnesses and from all the Democrats, Trump's causing the Ukraine to be more corrupt. Trump's hurting the Ukraine's legitimacy. Trump's hurting Zelensky's administration. We have Ukrainian officials admitting to Time magazine. Actually, the impeachment case against Trump means we can't properly investigate corruption. We couldn't do it because Hunter Biden was there, and now we can't do it because of the impeachment hearings. This impeachment and coup against Trump is actually causing more corruption in the Ukraine. This is coming from prosecutors from Zelensky, who all the Democrats and the witnesses admit, he's a good egg, man. He's really trying to make changes. He's trying to investigate corruption. Let's hear more. Quote, "It's too sensitive a topic," says an official in Kiev, who would only discuss the company's case on condition of anonymity. "I think that we need to investigate Burisma, not for Trump and not against Biden. We need to do that because it's just a case of corruption," says the official, who's familiar with Ukrainian President Zelensky. But the impeachment inquiry has, quote, "changed the context around the alleged corruption at Burisma," adds the official, and this is bad. In other words, they're saying, of course we should investigate corruption. Yes, not because it's against Biden, because it's corrupt. Yes, Hunter Biden being on there meant we were less able to investigate it. Yes, the impeachment effort means we're less able to investigate it. It's bad that this has changed because of the impeachment. What did Trump say? The one time Sondland said he asked him directly, "What do you want done in Ukraine?" What did Trump say? "No quid pro quo. I just want Zelensky to do what he got elected to do. What he said he was going to do if he got elected." What did Zelensky say he was going to do? Fight corruption. So when Trump talks to him on the phone and he says, "Here's a bunch of corrupt stuff. One of those corrupt things is I heard this prosecutor got fired in this company, Burisma, and Joe and Hunter Biden. Can you investigate that?" Here's the Ukrainian official saying, yes, that should be investigated. Not because it's against Biden, but because it's corrupt. That's Ukrainian officials. Now, we know that the Ukrainian officials, including Zelensky, have said, we didn't feel pressured at all. We didn't think there was a quid pro quo. So now we have an admission outside the context of Trump offering aid, after they've already got the aid, where they're lamenting the fact, saying, Jesus, the fact that this phone call was nothing, there was no pressure, and now the fact that the Democrats are trying to impeach, and the fact that Hunter Biden was on the board, means we can't even investigate this corrupt oligarch. More quotes. The case of Burisma cuts to the heart of the Republican defense of Trump. The president and his allies have insisted that the Bidens acted corruptly to shield the company from prosecution in the Ukraine. The former vice president, his son, and their supporters have strenuously denied the allegation. And there's no evidence to suggest Joe Biden's decisions were ever influenced by his son's involvement in Burisma. Well, that's sort of misleading, isn't it? One, there's no evidence because we haven't had an investigation. And secondly, there's no evidence to suggest Trump wanting an investigation into Biden was to help his chances in 2020. None. But the same articles will say, oh, if Trump did this, it's corrupt. Despite the fact we have zero evidence. No one's given any evidence that Trump did this for personal reasons. None. No one spoke to his motivation. They just assume. But for some reason, they have to assume. Until we have evidence that Biden did this for corrupt reasons, that's like saying there's no evidence that Rob robbed the bank for personal reasons. Perhaps he was like Robin Hood and was giving it to the poor. So no need for an investigation. It's ridiculous. But anyways, I move on. But the treatment of that company in Ukraine suggests that the role of Hunter Biden continues to affect the handling of the company's case, prompting the new government of President Zelensky to weigh its approach to fighting graft with particular care, especially when it comes to the country's notoriously corrupt gas sector. Now, if we have everyone in Ukraine admitting, look, Hunter Biden being on the board of directors is a problem, and it's hard for us to investigate. Why would that be? Because they don't want to piss off Obama and Biden. And if that's the case, and we know that Biden forced one of the prosecutors out, and now the Ukraine's walking on eggshells like, holy crap, they fired one prosecutor that was, at least on paper, supposed to be looking into this. Why shouldn't that be investigated when the actual Ukrainians are saying Hunter Biden's role means it makes it difficult for them to investigate? We don't know how major players in the United States would turn any statement on the issue of corruption, says Bogdan Yermolenko, a senior lawmaker in the ruling party of Zelensky. If we would try to make an emphasis on this issue right now, we would sound like we are trying to contradict President Trump and the Republicans. The sensitivity around Burisma also came up during impeachment hearings this week. In testimony Tuesday, Volker, the Trump administration foreign special representative, said he urged the Ukrainian government not to give Burisma any special treatment because of Hunter Biden. What I was trying to do in working with the Ukrainians was thread a needle, Volker testified. He encouraged the government to investigate at Burisma without getting tangled up in Trump allegations of corruption against Biden. Okay.
All right, I love you.
Love you. If there was a way to thread that needle, I thought it was worth the effort. Ukraine is still trying to thread that needle and having a hard time of it. Since taking office this summer, the government's new prosecutor general, Ryabishapka, has initiated wide-ranging review of many old corruption cases, looking for signs that they were closed under suspicious circumstances. He's also forced prosecutors to undergo a series of examinations meant to test their competency and integrity. Quote, there were many, many cases which were buried by my predecessors, he said in a November 13th interview. But his statements have reflected the tension involved in reopening of Burisma. In the Kiev Post interview, the prosecutor general said, this is the highest prosecutor appointed by Zelensky, who all the Democrats and the Democrat witnesses have said is a good egg. He's seeking to out corruption. Here's his head guy trying to out corruption. The prosecutor general said that some of these cases being reviewed involved the co-founder of Burisma, a former ecology minister named Zolchevsky. In a separate interview on November 5th, however, the prosecutor general said there is no case against Burisma. It exists only in the mind of the person who made it up. In a ranking of Ukraine's wealthiest oligarchs, Zolchevsky ranked 10th place. Burisma and its founders have come up repeatedly during the House impeachment inquiry. During his testimony on November 13th, George Kent, the official who oversees Ukrainian policy at State Department, alleged that Zolchevsky has been involved in, quote, self-dealing during his entire tenure as ecology minister between 2010 and 12. He used his regulatory authority to award gas exploitation licenses. That would be corruption in my view. Zolchevsky's denied the allegations. He did not respond to requests. The officer of the prosecutor general declined to make Ryabishapka available for the interview. During a press conference in Kiev on Wednesday, Ryabishapka told reporters that there are more than a dozen criminal cases in Ukraine that involve Zolchevsky or his company. They will all be reviewed in due course, he added. Ignoring them is not much of an option for Ukraine. Quote, we cannot not investigate it just because it will benefit Trump or hurt Biden, says the official who believes it's a case of corruption. But given how radioactive the Burisma case has become in Washington, the government is not eager to pursue it in the midst of the U.S. presidential race. We can do it after the elections, the official tells Time. Do you see what's going on here? The Democrats are getting exactly what they want. They don't want an investigation into Burisma. If they did, they'd be publicly calling for it. Now, remember, Biden and Obama, supposedly, they wanted Shokin out. They wanted this prosecutor out because they really wanted an investigation into Zolchevsky. Have you heard any of the Democrats at these hearings saying, yes, Burisma ought to be investigated? We think the Biden should be left out, but investigate Burisma. No, they're saying even talking of investigating Burisma is inappropriate. So in 3 short years, the Democrats have went from, we're not going to give you $1 billion because we feel you're not properly investigating Burisma, to trying to investigate Burisma as a crime. And Ukraine admits that Hunter Biden being on the board made it more difficult for them to investigate, and admits that the impeachment hearings means that they're not even going to try to investigate until after the election. But why? Because they're afraid if they investigate and then the Democrats win, now they'll be retaliated against. The exact same thing again that they accused Trump of. Remember? That's what they're saying. Oh, of course Zelensky's saying there wasn't any pressure. He knows Trump will retaliate against him. Now we have admission from Ukrainian officials. Dude, the fact that it was Hunter Biden and the fact that some impeachment stuff's going on, now we feel like we can't do anything. Because the Democrats will say, oh, you're trying to hurt Biden. Oh, you're trying to help Trump. But that's not what it's about. It's just about investigating corruption. Now you tell me how anyone could read that Time article and think that it's a bad idea for Trump to want the Bidens investigated. It doesn't mean the Bidens committed a crime necessarily, but there should be an investigation. The top guy from the previous administration, who's supposed to be outing corruption in the Ukraine, who admits that this guy Zlochevsky's corrupt, his son's getting paid by Zlochevsky. The Ukrainians are saying, dude, the fact that your son's getting paid by this guy means it's really difficult for us to investigate him. Biden says, I want you to fire the prosecutor that's looking into this case, or you're not going to get $1 billion that's been approved in congressional aid. And now an impeachment inquiry is scaring the Ukrainians from investigating this because they think it'll be seen as partisan. Meanwhile, all we have Trump on record saying, despite everybody's presumptions and feelings that there was a quid pro quo and all this crap, despite all of that, which again, I've already argued to, I don't care if there's a quid pro quo or not. At all. I don't care. Biden should be investigated. 2016 election interference should be investigated. Burisma should be investigated. The Ukrainians agree. That's where we're at tonight. So, in a nutshell, from everything I've talked about tonight, important things to remember. 3 points, basically. 1, key testimony from today from Sondland was, he says he has a presumption of a quid pro quo. He admits that Trump never told him that. No American ever told him that. It was just his presumption. And he understands that other people could have came to different conclusions. Number 2, when he specifically and directly asked Trump, what do you want done with Ukraine? Trump emphatically said, no quid pro quo. I want nothing. I want Zelensky to do what he promised to do when getting elected, which was fight corruption. We know from this Time article, that's exactly what Zelensky and his prosecutor want to do. They want to go after people like Zlochevsky. But they feel that because of Hunter Biden being on the board and because of the Democrats and their impeachment efforts, it's hampering their ability to fight that corruption. And number 3, the Republicans are inept. They are going about the defense of Trump in the exact opposite way. They're spending all their time talking about the whistleblower and all their time talking about no quid pro quo. If they win both of those arguments, the Democrats could still win the narrative because all they have to do is win. It's inappropriate for Trump to ask for these investigations. So even if there wasn't a quid pro quo, well, Trump still requested it, so that's bad. And even if there wasn't, or there was corruption with the whistleblower, well, it doesn't matter because it led to us finding something that was inappropriate. But if you reverse the order and you prove that there was reason to investigate Ukrainian election interference and the State Department burying that, and there was reason to investigate the Bidens, then you could lose the other 2 arguments. You could lose the quid pro quo argument, and you could lose the whistleblower argument, and you still win the debate. And if you win those arguments, now all of a sudden, and there was no quid pro quo, not only, let's start with this. We'll start with the assumption that Trump was right to investigate Biden, Trump was right to investigate 2016 election interference, and the State Department admitting to trying to bury that. Also, we don't think there was a quid pro quo. Now all of a sudden that argument's way better because it's like, wow, So they win those top two arguments now, and there wasn't even a quid pro quo. Zelensky just wanted to do this himself. Further proves the Democrats are trying to cover up corruption. And now this whistleblower, now all of a sudden it's like, wow, this whistleblower stuff's really interesting. Because now it's not just, well, okay, there might have been shadiness with the whistleblower, but ultimately it allowed us to find facts that Trump was bad. Now it is, wow, the Democrats are corrupt, and they're trying to stop Trump from investigating corruption that Democrats committed. And one of the ways, now that that's been proven, I now see the shadiness with this whistleblower. Now all of a sudden the whistleblower story is very important. It's more evidence of the corruption. But you have to start with the argument Trump had every right to investigate Biden in 2016 election interference. That's it. That's the entire argument. And they're not doing it. I've been talking an hour and 45 minutes. Make me the counsel. Let me go talk to them. Let me talk to Volker. Let me talk to Sondland. But unfortunately, that won't happen. I got 3 people watching my video. So I do thank all 3 of you, though. But that's the way she blows. You don't hear people talking like this. People aren't making this definitive case. So please share this video if you can. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. Share this Time article. Let me put it up here. Share this with people. Like I said, look for a video tomorrow for me. It won't be a live stream. It'll be just on this. I might also do a live stream during the day tomorrow. But this article from Time is what my video may be on tomorrow. And that's incredible. It proves that the Democrats' impeachment efforts are actually facilitating corruption in the Ukraine. It proves that Hunter Biden being on the board of directors actually facilitated corruption in the Ukraine. Or at least stopping the corruption. So I think that's a big issue. So thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate you all tuning in to me. And have a good one.